Madison Porter lived in a world where money made consequences disappear. Crash your car? Daddy writes a check. Ruin someone's life? Daddy makes a call. For 22 years, she documented it all on social media. Her reign of consequence-free chaos, backed by her father's billions. The Porter name was a golden ticket in Boston, buying silence from judges, erasing evidence, and crushing anyone who dared to seek justice. Then she hit Terrence Walker. She left him bleeding in the rain, his leg shattered, while she posted selfies about the scratch on her Porsche. Just another mess for Daddy's money to clean up. But this time was different. This time, the case landed on Judge Desmond Cole's desk. For 15 years, the judge had watched Boston's elite treat justice like a commodity, waiting for the perfect moment to tear down their empire of privilege. Now, as Madison struts into his courtroom streaming live to her million followers, he finally has it. The Porters are about to learn what every corrupt dynasty fears most. Some things money can't buy, and some men can't be bought at any price. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Hey there, my amazing followers. Madison Porter's voice echoed through her massive walk-in closet, its perfectly lit interior bigger than most people's apartments. She held her phone at the signature influencer angle, designer rings glittering as she panned across rows of handbags worth more than a year's salary for the average American. Time for another closet tour. Daddy just got back from Paris, and you know what that means. Behind her, Maria, her maid, silently reorganized a stack of cashmere sweaters, trying to stay out of frame. Madison's perfectly manicured hand reached for a pristine white Hermes box, deliberately knocking over the neat pile of sweaters Maria had just arranged. Oops! Madison giggled, not even glancing at the mess. Sorry, not sorry. Anyway, look what Daddy brought me. She opened the box to reveal a crocodile Birkin bag in a shocking shade of pink. It's a limited edition, only 10 made. I already have 3, but this color is everything. Maria bent down to clean up the scattered sweaters, her face carefully blank as Madison continued her live stream. Oh my God, you guys won't believe who tried to buy this bag before Daddy got it for me. That basic waitress who got fired last week for being like totally incompetent, as if she could ever afford it. The incident Madison referenced so casually had occurred at LeBlanc, Boston's most exclusive restaurant. She'd arrived fashionably late for her reservation, already tipsy from afternoon champagne with her equally privileged friends. The waitress, Amanda Mitchell, a graduate student working to pay her tuition, had made the grave mistake of bringing a 2015 vintage instead of the 2014 Madison had ordered. Are you actually serious right now? Madison had shrieked, causing heads to turn throughout the elegant dining room. Do I look like someone who drinks inferior wine? Do you have any idea who I am? Amanda had stood her ground, professionally explaining that the 2014 was temporarily out of stock. The 2015 is actually considered superior by many critics, Miss Porter. I'd be happy to. The rest of her sentence was cut off by a face full of expensive wine as Madison threw her glass directly at her. Now you can taste it yourself, you ignorant bitch. The restaurant manager had materialized instantly, profusely apologizing to Madison while firing Amanda on the spot. Within an hour, Howard Porter's office had called to ensure the incident wouldn't make it into the society pages, and Amanda found herself blacklisted from every high-end restaurant in the city. Now, continuing her live stream, Madison pulled out her phone to show her followers the video she'd taken of Amanda's humiliation. Content warning. Poor people trying to act important, she laughed, replaying the moment of the wine hitting Amanda's face while adding mocking commentary. The stream's chat filled with laughing emojis and supportive comments from her million-plus followers, many of them aspiring to her level of consequence-free living. Madison basked in their attention, completely ignoring Maria as the maid quietly excused herself, having finished cleaning up the deliberate mess. The incident at LeBlanc was just the latest in a long string of similar episodes. At 16, Madison had crashed her first car, a brand-new Mercedes convertible, into the school's trophy case after deciding that parking in the main hallway would be iconic. Instead of facing consequences, she'd filmed herself sitting on the hood of the wrecked car, making peace signs while her father wrote checks and made calls in the background. Okay, you guys, story time. Madison positioned herself on her custom-made closet island, surrounded by shopping bags. Remember that super viral video of me playing champagne cork target practice from my balcony? Daddy's PR team said I should address it, so here's what really happened. The video in question showed Madison and her friends drinking $2,000 bottles of champagne and purposefully aiming the corks at homeless people 20 stories below, scoring points based on how close they got to hitting them. When it went viral, for all the wrong reasons, Howard's crisis management team had spun it as a misunderstood charity event. Madison had actually been announcing donations to homeless shelters with each cork popped. The fact that no shelters ever received any donations was quietly buried. It was totally just a game, and we were planning to donate anyway. Madison lied smoothly to her camera. People are so sensitive these days. But anyway, speaking of champagne, wait until you see what I'm planning for my million-follower celebration party tonight. She switched to her rear-facing camera to show the army of workers setting up for the party in her penthouse's main room. The theme is, know your place. Get it? Like everyone has to know their place in society. The serving staff will be wearing these super cute little signs with their net worth, and my guests get points for making them cry. The winner gets a shopping spree at Gucci. This kind of casual cruelty had been Madison's trademark since childhood, carefully nurtured by her father's ability to make problems disappear. During her first year of college, she'd been caught using her phone to cheat during a final exam. The professor, Dr. William Barnes, had initially stood firm. "Miss Porter, this is grounds for immediate failure and possible expulsion," he'd stated firmly, confiscating her phone. Madison had just smiled, twirling her hair around one finger. "We'll see about that. Daddy just luave supporting higher education." A week later, the university had announced the creation of the Porter Business School Wing, a $50 million donation that coincidentally came with a stipulation about reviewing certain academic misconduct cases. Dr. Barnes found himself reassigned to a satellite campus, and Madison's grade mysteriously changed to an A. Even the police had learned to handle Madison with kid gloves, thanks to Howard's careful cultivation of the right relationships. He'd taught her exactly how to handle any encounter with law enforcement, which officers were on his payroll, what phrases would get her immediate preferential treatment, and how to ensure any incident reports disappeared before they could be filed. "If Officer Williams pulls you over," he'd explained during one of their regular lessons in his home office, "just mention the charity gala for the Police Benevolent Association. He's on the board now thanks to our generous support." Madison had treated it like a game, making a TikTok series called Rich Girl Hacks, where she subtly demonstrated her techniques for avoiding consequences. The videos were carefully edited to seem like jokes while actually showing her real methods, adding to her mystique among followers who wished they could live so freely. The pattern repeated endlessly. Madison would do something awful, film it, for social media, and Howard would deploy his resources to make it disappear while she gained more followers. When she bullied her personal shopper to tears over a sold-out Chanel bag, Howard not only fired the woman, but ensured she'd never work in luxury retail again. When she mocked a scholarship student's speech pattern at a charity gala, the organization quietly increased the student's funding in exchange for silence. "Daddy says I'm his princess," Madison often told her followers, "and a princess needs her castle to be perfect." Her social media feeds read like a testament to consequence-free living. Drinking and driving videos played for laughs, casual vandalism treated as art, and constant displays of cruelty framed as entertainment. Each incident came with a price, tag that Howard gladly paid, teaching his daughter that everything and everyone had a price. As the sun began to set on Boston's exclusive Beacon Hill neighborhood, Madison's penthouse filled with the city's youngest and richest residents, all eager to participate in her million-follower celebration. The serving staff, mostly students, and struggling actors, wore the promise signs displaying their net worth while trying to maintain their dignity. "Welcome to the Know Your Place party," Madison announced, standing on a custom-built stage in a dress that cost more than most of the servers would make in a year. "The rules are simple. Make them cry, get points. Most points at the end of the night wins a Gucci shopping spree. And don't worry about going too far. Daddy's lawyers made them all sign NDAs. The partygoers laughed and cheered, eager to prove themselves worthy of Madison's inner circle. They competed to devise the cruelest remarks, the most humiliating requests, the perfect combination of words to break someone's spirit. Madison filmed it all, providing running commentary for her followers while occasionally joining in herself. "Oh my God, you guys, watch this." She approached a young server who'd been maintaining his composure despite increasingly vicious attacks. "Hey, what's your name? Brad? Okay, Brad, I just looked up your student loan debt. And guess what? That's exactly what I spent on my shoes tonight. How does it feel to be worth less than what's on my feet?" The party continued late into the night, fueled by expensive champagne and the intoxicating feeling of total impunity. None of them knew that in less than 24 hours, everything would change. None of them could have guessed that this party, this celebration of consequence-free cruelty, would be the last time Madison Porter felt truly untouchable. As the final guests staggered out around 3 a.m., Madison picked up her phone for one last live stream. Her makeup was slightly smeared, her designer dress showing signs of a wild night, but her smile remained triumphant. "Best party ever, you guys. Total damage report. 14 servers cried, 3 quit on the spot, and 1 had an actual breakdown. Plus, we raised $0 for charity because, why bother? Stay tuned for tomorrow. I'm thinking of taking the Porsche for a spin after brunch. Maybe I'll let you guys vote on which traffic laws to break." She ended the stream and walked to her floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city that had always been her playground. In her reflection, she saw exactly what she wanted to see. A princess in her tower, untouchable and unstoppable, protected by her father's power and money from any consequence life might try to throw at her. In less than 24 hours, that reflection would shatter. But for now, Madison Porter fell asleep secure in her belief that she would always be above the law, above morality, above the basic rules that governed everyone else's lives. Her last thought before drifting off was about which outfit she should wear for tomorrow's drive. It needed to be perfect for social media, after all. She had no way of knowing it would be the last carefree decision she would ever make. Rain pounded the Boston streets as midnight approached. The last revelers from Madison Porter's million-follower celebration had departed hours ago, but Madison herself was far from done celebrating. She'd decided to take her new Porsche 911 GT3 for a spin, live streaming as she weaved through traffic, at dangerous speeds. "Another boring red light, you guys." She held her phone in one hand, steering with the other, empty champagne bottles rolling around in the passenger footwell. But rules are totally optional when your daddy owns half. The city, right? The rain-slicked streets reflected the neon signs of the city's less affluent district, where Terrence Walker was just leaving the community center he'd helped build from the ground up. Despite the late hour, he felt satisfied. The youth mentorship program was making real progress, giving kids alternatives to the streets. "Just one more block," he muttered, pulling his jacket tighter against the rain. His wife Sarah had texted earlier, saying their 8-year-old son Marcus was waiting up to hear about the center's latest success story. The security footage later recovered would show the sequence in horrifying clarity. Madison's Porsche running, the red light at over 80 miles per hour, Terrence halfway through the crosswalk, the impact that sent him flying 20 feet. But in the moment, all anyone heard was the sickening crunch of metal meeting flesh, followed by the screech of expensive tires as Madison fled the scene. "Oh my God, oh my God." Madison's live stream continued, her phone now on the passenger seat as she accelerated away. "Did you guys see that? Some idiot just totally jumped in front of my car. This is so inconvenient. There's a scratch on my bumper." The handful of witnesses rushed to Terrence's aid, including 16-year-old Kevin Mitchell, who had been filming the street with his new phone. "I got the car," he shouted to the others as they called 911. "It's a gray Porsche, custom plates. Prince SS1. Across town in his palatial Beacon Hill mansion, Howard Porter's private line rang. The phone was a dedicated circuit, known to only a select few. People paid very well to alert him to potential problems involving his daughter. "Sir," the voice belonged to Officer James Sullivan, one of several police officers on Howard's Payroll. There's been an incident involving Miss Madison's vehicle. Hit and run, victim alive but critical. Witnesses on scene. Howard was already moving, decades of practice having perfected his response to Madison's incidents. Location? Downtown Roxbury District. I'm first on scene but haven't called it in officially yet. Victim is Terrence Walker, runs the community center, multiple witnesses, and there's video. Handle the scene, Howard ordered, his other phone already connecting to Bradley Wells, his chief fixer. I'll handle everything else. Standard arrangement plus 50% hazard bonus. The machinery of privilege and corruption hummed to life. Bradley Wells activated a network of lawyers, PR specialists, and corrupted officials. Before the first, official police units arrived on scene. Plans were already in motion to control the narrative. Sarah Walker's phone rang as she sat waiting for her husband, their son Marcus finally asleep after insisting on staying up. The caller ID showed Terrence's number, but it was a stranger's voice, a paramedic explaining in gentle terms that there had been an accident. At Boston General Hospital, Dr. Rebecca Palmer delivered the devastating news to Sarah. The impact caused severe trauma to his right leg. We had no choice but to amputate below the knee. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Walker. While Terrence fought for his life in surgery, Madison Porter was already home, examining her car in the private garage beneath her penthouse. Look at this damage. She filmed the dented bumper and cracked headlight for her Instagram story. People should really watch where they're walking. Now I have to get this fixed before my brunch plans tomorrow. The first official investigator to arrive at the scene was Detective Lisa Morales, a veteran of the department's hit-and-run division. She immediately noticed signs that the scene had been altered. Skid marks partially washed away, debris patterns inconsistent with witness statements. What exactly happened to the car parts we found? She demanded of Officer Sullivan. Must have been moved during the initial response, he replied smoothly. You know how chaotic these scenes get. I've logged everything as miscellaneous debris. But Detective Morales had already spotted something the cleanup crew had missed. A small fragment of custom paint, the exact shade used on Madison Porter's limited edition Porsche. She carefully pocketed it before anyone could notice. The next morning, while Terrence Walker's family gathered around his hospital bed, Madison Porter was posting breakfast selfies from her favorite rooftop restaurant. Ugh, my head, she captioned one photo. Too much champagne, but at least my outfit is on point. In his chambers at the courthouse, Judge Desmond Cole reviewed the preliminary reports from the hit and run. 20 years on the bench had taught him to recognize the signs of powerful people meddling with justice. The inconsistencies in the police reports were too perfect, the witness statements too vague where they should have been clear. Margaret, he called to his clerk, pull everything we have on Howard Porter's previous legal entanglements. Every case, every settlement, every judge who's heard anything involving him or his daughter. Howard Porter himself was meeting with Police Chief William Bradford at the Somerset Club, Boston's most exclusive private establishment. They sat in a wood-paneled room that had hosted centuries of similar conversations. Powerful men making problems disappear. The witness situation concerns me, Howard said, sliding an envelope across the mahogany table. Especially the boy with the video. Chief Bradford picked up the envelope without looking inside. I'll have my people speak with the families. These situations can be confusing for young people. Sometimes they misremember details. Meanwhile, at Boston General, Sarah Walker sat holding her husband's hand while Marcus drew pictures for his father's hospital room. The doctors were explaining the long road ahead, months of rehabilitation, the cost of prosthetics, the likelihood that Terrence would never walk normally. Again, the community center. Terrence whispered, his voice weak. The kids need... Shh. Sarah squeezed his hand. The center will be fine. We'll figure everything out. She didn't mention the mysterious phone call she'd received that morning. A lawyer offering an immediate cash settlement in exchange for signing some papers. She'd hung up without letting him finish. Madison's first court appearance was scheduled for the following week. She arrived at the courthouse in a designer outfit worth more than most families' monthly income, her makeup perfect for the cameras she knew would be waiting. Justice is like, so boring, she posted, taking selfies on the courthouse steps. At Least my outfit is fire. A court fashion. Rich girl problems. Her father's legal team had prepared a careful strategy. Paint Madison as the victim of a dangerous intersection. Suggest that Terrence had been jaywalking. Emphasize the unclear road conditions. They'd assembled focus groups to test different narratives, finding the most sympathetic angle for their privileged client. Remember, lead attorney Jonathan Pierce coached Madison before entering the courtroom. You're a young woman who was tragically in the wrong place at the wrong time. Show remorse, but not guilt. Confusion, but not responsibility. But as they entered courtroom 7, they found Judge Desmond Cole presiding, a development Howard's network hadn't managed to prevent. The judge's reputation for incorruptibility was legendary, his commitment to equal justice unwavering. Miss Porter. Judge Cole's voice cut through the courtroom's whispers. I see you're recording with your phone. In my courtroom, all devices are switched off and put away. This isn't social media. This is justice. Madison's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly as she was forced to hand her phone to her lawyer. For the first time in her life, she couldn't simply document and dismiss what was happening to her. Detective Morales sat in the back of the courtroom observing. She'd spent the week watching key witnesses suddenly change their stories. The teenager with the video now wasn't sure about the car's details. The other witnesses had developed surprising problems with their memory, but she'd been building cases against privileged perpetrators long enough to know how to play the long game. The preliminary hearing proceeded according to the defense's plan. Madison was charged but released on bail, with Howard's lawyers successfully arguing against any travel restrictions. Outside the courthouse, Howard's PR team had arranged for sympathetic reporters to be in prime positions. Madison Porter, daughter of prominent businessman Howard Porter, has been unfairly targeted in this unfortunate accident, Jonathan Pierce announced to the cameras. We're confident that when all the facts come to light, she will be completely exonerated. But not everything was going according to Howard's carefully orchestrated plan. Judge Cole had scheduled an unusually aggressive timeline for the trial, limiting the defense's ability to delay. And in his chambers, he was already reviewing Madison's history of similar incidents, cases that had mysteriously disappeared from official records but left traces in judicial archives. Detective Morales was building her own case file, carefully, documenting every instance of interference she encountered. The paint chips she'd recovered had been logged into evidence through a trusted colleague in the crime lab, bypassing the usual channels that Howard's influence controlled. Back at the hospital, Terrence Walker was beginning the painful process of physical therapy. The community center's board had assured Sarah they would keep his position open, but the mounting medical bills were already threatening to overwhelm them. Daddy, Madison whined later that evening, sprawled on her penthouse couch. That judge was like super mean to me. Can't you just do something about him like you always do? Howard Porter stood at the window, staring out at the city he'd always been able to control. For the first time, a note of worry crept into his voice. Judge Cole. He's different, Princess. But don't worry. We'll find another way. In her office late that night, Detective Morales received an anonymous email containing security camera footage from a parking garage. The video showed Howard's fixer meeting with Kevin Mitchell's parents, an envelope changing hands. She added it to her growing file. Judge Cole also worked late, reviewing old case files involving Howard Porter's various enterprises. A pattern emerged. Judges who ruled against Porter's interests often found their careers taking unexpected turns. Those who ruled in his favor seemed to prosper. At his private club, Howard met with his crisis management team. The usual playbook wasn't working as smoothly as it had in the past. Judge Cole's reputation was spotless, making him immune to their usual pressure tactics. The media wasn't following their preferred narrative as obediently as usual. Get creative, Howard ordered his team. I don't care what it takes or what it costs. My daughter will not face consequences for this. But in his heart, a small seed of doubt had taken root. For the first time since Madison was born, Howard Porter faced the possibility that his money and influence might not be enough to protect her from the results of her actions. Madison remained oblivious to her father's concerns, already planning her outfits for future court appearances. She'd started a new social media series, Courtroom Couture, featuring her designer ensembles for legal proceedings. "You guys being accused of a crime is like such a hassle," she told her followers. "But at least I get to serve looks while serving justice. Don't forget to like and subscribe." In the hospital, Marcus Walker curled up in the chair next to his father's bed, clutching the stuffed animal Terrence had given him last birthday. Sarah watched them both, her hand unconsciously clenching into a fist as she scrolled past news coverage of Madison Porter's latest social media posts. The machinery of privilege continued to move, but for the first time, it was meeting resistance it couldn't simply bulldoze through. Judge Cole's courtroom would prove to be ground zero for a battle between justice and power, with lives and futures hanging in the balance. And Madison Porter, still confident in her father's ability to make anything go away, had no idea that her carefully curated world of consequence-free living was about to shatter completely. The security footage from the night of Terrence Walker's accident played on Judge Desmond Cole's computer screen, his office illuminated only by its cold blue light. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m., nearly 4 hours after the hit and run. On screen, 3 police officers returned to the scene, methodically altering evidence positions and washing away skid marks. "Pause it there," Judge Cole instructed his clerk, Margaret Wilson. The frame froze on a clear shot of Officer James Sullivan directing the cleanup operation. And this footage mysteriously vanished from official evidence within hours? "Yes, Your Honor. But someone anonymously uploaded a backup to the court's secure server." Margaret handed him another file. "And there's more. The officer in charge of evidence lockup logged these items as unrelated debris before they disappeared entirely." Judge Cole leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. 20 years on the bench had taught him to recognize the signs of corruption. But the brazenness of this operation was stunning. In all his years presiding over Boston's courts, he'd never seen such a coordinated effort to obstruct justice. Across town, Detective Lisa Morales arrived at her precinct to find an unmarked envelope in her locker. Inside was a cheap burner phone and photos of her family, her daughter at soccer practice, her son leaving school, her husband at his office. A typed note read simply, "Lose the file. Final warning." Instead of complying, Morales added the envelope to her growing collection of evidence, carefully documenting each attempt at intimidation. She'd been building cases against wealthy criminals long enough to know the importance of a paper trail. "Good morning, Boston," Madison Porter's voice chirped from her latest Instagram story. "Day 3 of this super annoying trial thing. But look at this amazing Chanel suit I'm wearing. Swipe up for outfit details." She posed in front of her mirror, completely oblivious to the gathering storm around her. The story cut to clips from her morning routine, her personal stylist arranging her hair, her makeup artist ensuring she looked appropriately somber, but still photogenic for court, her lawyer reviewing the day's strategy. "Remember, Jonathan," Pierce's voice could be heard off camera, "we're going for sympathetic but not guilty." But the public's sympathy was rapidly eroding. Local news stations had begun running a series on Terrence Walker's community work, including interviews with teens whose lives he'd changed through his youth center programs. The contrast between his dedicated service and Madison's flippant social media posts was striking. In Judge Cole's courtroom, Sarah Walker took the stand. She wore a simple blue dress, her dignity palpable as she faced Madison and her battalion of lawyers. "Mr. Walker had just finished a late counseling session with one of our at-risk youth," Sarah testified, her voice steady. "He texted me at 11:42 p.m., saying he was heading home. Our son Marcus was waiting up to hear about the teen's progress." "And how has the accident affected your family?" the prosecutor asked. "Beyond the obvious physical trauma." Sarah paused, gathering strength. "Our son used to believe in justice. He believed that if you worked hard and helped others, good things would happen. Now he watches this woman post dancing videos from parties while his father learns to walk again, and he's starting to believe something very different about the world." Madison, caught scrolling through her phone under the defense table, didn't even look up. Outside the courtroom, another drama was unfolding. Kevin Mitchell, The teenage witness who'd captured video of Madison's car fleeing the scene was being approached by Howard's fixer, Bradley Wells, at his after-school job. The security cameras at the convenience store captured their conversation. "Your parents mentioned you're interested in attending Harvard," Wells said smoothly, placing a thick envelope on the counter. Mr. Porter sits on several educational foundation boards. He's always eager to help promising young students, assuming they understand the importance of perspective in complex situations. What Wells didn't know was that the store's owner, disgusted by the obvious attempted bribery, had already forwarded copies of the security footage to both Detective Morales and Judge Cole. Back in the courtroom, Madison's social media activity during the trial was becoming increasingly erratic. Between witnesses, she posted shopping hauls and party clips, complaining about how boring the trial was and mocking what she called the dramatic testimony. "OMG, you guys," she posted during a lunch break. "This lady on the stand is literally crying about her husband's leg like it's the end of the world. Hello? Prosthetics exist. Besides, he should have looked both ways." Courtroom drama. Rich girl problems. The post went viral for all the wrong reasons, drawing widespread condemnation. But Madison remained insulated in her bubble of privilege, unable to comprehend the damage she was doing to her own case. Howard Porter, however, was growing increasingly concerned. His usual tactics weren't working against Judge Cole, and his private investigators had found nothing they could use as leverage. The judge's record was spotless, his personal life beyond reproach. "There has to be something," Howard insisted, during a late-night strategy session. "Everyone has a price. Everyone has secrets." "Not this one," his head investigator reported. "The closest thing to a scandal we could find is that he volunteers at a homeless shelter on weekends. He lives modestly, donates to charity, and his daughter is working her way through law school without any help from Daddy's connections." The next blow came in the form of an envelope delivered to Judge Cole's chambers. It contained photos of his daughter at law school, along with friendly advice about her future career prospects. The judge added it to his growing file of evidence about the Porter family's attempts at obstruction of justice. Meanwhile, Detective Morales had been quietly building a parallel investigation. Working with a trusted journalist, she began connecting the dots between Howard Porter's philanthropic donations and a pattern of corrupted officials. Each charitable contribution seemed to coincide with a case being dropped or evidence disappearing. The contrast between the two worlds, privilege and consequence, was starkly illustrated one afternoon when Terrence Walker attempted his first steps with a prosthetic leg. The physical therapy session was grueling, sweat pouring down his face as he struggled to maintain balance. At the exact same moment, Madison Porter was trying on shoes for her next court appearance, live streaming the experience for her followers. "These Louboutins are perfect for looking innocent," she declared, tottering around her closet in 5-inch heels. The mounting pressure began showing cracks in Howard's normally impenetrable facade. During a meeting with his crisis management team, he snapped at a suggestion to have Madison appear, more contrite. "She is who she is," he barked. "I made her that way. Our job is to protect her, not change her." The comment was revealing. Perhaps the first time Howard had acknowledged his role in creating the situation. But it was too late for self-reflection. The machinery of justice, long held at bay by money and influence, was finally beginning to move. Judge Cole's investigation into past cases revealed a pattern of judicial manipulations spanning decades. Judges who ruled against Porter interests found their careers stalling, their families facing unexpected difficulties. Those who played along received mysterious windfalls and prestigious appointments. Howard's network of influence, built over a lifetime of strategic relationships and carefully placed donations, was beginning to unravel. Officials who had once been eager to help now hesitated, worried about their own exposure. Detective Morales' evidence file grew thicker each day. Anonymous tips began arriving more frequently as people sensed a shift in the power dynamic. Former victims of Madison's behavior, long silenced by NDAs and payoffs, began finding ways to share their stories. But it was Madison herself who continued to do the most damage to her case. Unable to read the room or understand the gravity of her situation, She treated the entire process as content for her social media empire. During a particularly emotional day of testimony, when Terrence Walker's physical therapist was describing the challenges he would face for the rest of his life, Madison was caught taking selfies with different sad expressions, apparently practicing her courtroom faces. "Your Honor," her lawyer tried to explain, "Miss Porter is simply documenting her experience." "Her experience?" Judge Cole's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "Mr. Pierce, this is not a social media event. This is a serious criminal, proceeding with life-altering consequences for real people." The word consequences seemed to bounce off Madison's perfectly styled exterior. She'd never faced real ones before. Why should this be any different? But the ground was shifting beneath her Louboutin heels. Her former friends, sensing the change in wind direction, began quietly distancing themselves. Party invitations dwindled. Her social media engagement numbers started dropping as public opinion turned against her. Howard Porter, watching his daughter's oblivious performance in court, began to feel something he hadn't experienced in decades. Fear. Not of legal consequences, he'd always managed those, but of the possibility that his carefully constructed system of privilege and protection might not be enough this time. Judge Cole received another package in his chambers, this time containing detailed financial information about his daughter's law school loans, along with suggestions about how quickly those loans could be forgiven. He added it to his evidence file without hesitation. "Your Honor," Margaret said as she watched him document the latest attempt at bribery. "They're getting desperate." "Yes," Judge Cole agreed, "and desperate people make mistakes." In her separate investigation, Detective Morales was closing in on the network of corrupted officials. Each new piece of evidence revealed another layer of Howard Porter's influence. Machine. The teenager's convenience store video had opened up new avenues of investigation, leading to other instances of witness tampering. But the most damaging evidence continued to come from Madison herself. Her social media posts, intended to maintain her image as an untouchable princess, instead painted a picture of someone completely detached from the concept of responsibility. "Court. Fashion update," she posted after another day of testimony. "Judge Cole totally gave me the evil eye for my Versace dress today. Sorry not sorry for looking amazing while dealing with this drama. Courtroom couture. Rich girl life." The hashtags were now being filled with negative comments, but Madison either didn't notice or didn't care. She'd never had to care about public opinion before. Daddy's money had always insulated her from consequences. The day's session ended. Judge Cole sat in his chambers reviewing the mounting evidence of corruption. On his desk, files detailed decades of manipulation and obstruction. The Porter dynasty had spent years building a wall of money and influence between themselves and consequences. But walls, no matter how well constructed, eventually develop cracks. And through those cracks, justice sometimes finds a way to flow. In the hospital's physical therapy room, Terrence Walker gripped the parallel bars, sweat dripping from his forehead as he worked to master his new prosthetic leg. Each step was a battle, each movement a testament to human resilience. The contrast between his struggle and Madison's continuing display of privilege would soon become impossible for even the most sympathetic observer to ignore. The foundation of her consequence-free existence was beginning to crumble, though she remained too self-absorbed to notice. The stage was set for a reckoning that would shake Boston's power structure to its core. The only question was, who would be left standing when the dust settled? The answers would come sooner than anyone expected, and they would change lives forever. The sun hadn't yet risen over Boston when Howard Porter's investigation team delivered their latest report on Judge Desmond Cole. They'd tracked his weekend movements, hoping to find anything they could use as leverage. Instead, they discovered him volunteering at St. Mary's homeless shelter, serving breakfast and helping residents with job applications. "He does this every Saturday," the lead investigator explained, spreading surveillance photos across Howard's mahogany desk. "No cameras, no publicity, not even a tax write-off. He just helps people." Howard slammed his fist on the desk, sending coffee splashing across the expensive wood. "Everyone has something. Set up cameras around the shelter. Stage some compromising situations if you have to. I don't care what it takes. But they're attempts, To trap the judge backfired spectacularly. When they planted a young woman to act drunk and throw herself at him, Cole simply called her an Uber and paid for it himself. When they arranged for a donor to offer a substantial contribution to the shelter in exchange for judicial favors, Cole reported the attempted bribery to the ethics committee. Meanwhile, Madison was live-streaming her morning routine, completely oblivious to her father's mounting desperation. Her phone propped up on her bathroom counter. She chatted with followers while her glam team prepared her for another court appearance. "You guys, court is like so exhausting," she pouted as her makeup artist applied another layer of mascara. "But I'm thinking of starting a new fashion line, Courtroom Couture by Madison." What do you think? We could do like designer handcuffs and stuff." Her lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, could be heard groaning off camera. "Miss Porter, please. We've talked about this. Your social media activity is damaging your case." Madison rolled, her eyes dramatically for her audience. "Whatever. Daddy says the judge just needs the right motivation. Speaking of which, how amazing is this Alexander McQueen blazer? Totally giving innocent rich girl vibes." In the courthouse, Detective Morales was reviewing security footage from the parking garage beneath the building. Howard's fixer, Bradley. Wells had been busy. The cameras had caught him meeting with multiple witnesses, each encounter followed by sudden changes in testimony. "Look at this," she pointed out to her partner. "The timestamp matches exactly when our star witness suddenly developed memory problems about the car's description." The evidence of witness tampering was mounting, but Howard's influence still ran deep. Each time Morales tried to move forward with charges, paperwork mysteriously disappeared, or witnesses suddenly became unavailable. The morning's court session began with Terrence Walker's emotional testimony about the night of the accident. As he described the impact and his desperate attempts to drag himself out of the road, Madison sat at the defense table taking duck-face selfies. "Miss Porter," Judge Cole's voice cracked like thunder through the courtroom. "This is not a photo opportunity. Put the phone away or I will have it confiscated." "But Your Honor," Madison protested, "my followers need to see." "Your followers?" The judge's expression could have frozen hell itself. "Mr. Walker lost his leg because of your actions, and you're concerned about your followers?" The exchange went viral within hours, with social media turning decisively against Madison. But she remained insulated in her bubble of privilege, posting a follow-up video complaining about the super mean judge who totally doesn't understand influencer culture. Howard watched the public reaction with growing alarm. His usual network of allies was becoming increasingly hesitant to help. At his private club, where he'd always conducted business over expensive whiskey and handshake deals, he found himself sitting alone more often. "It's not personal, Howard," William Bradford, the police chief, told him quietly during a supposedly secret meeting. "But Judge Cole's been looking into old cases. People are nervous. Maybe it's time to consider a plea deal." "A plea deal?" Howard's voice rose dangerously. "My daughter doesn't plea. She doesn't face consequences. That's not how this works." But for the first time in decades, things weren't working according to Howard Porter's plans. His carefully cultivated network of influence was showing cracks, and through those cracks, justice was beginning to seep. The situation deteriorated further when Madison's defense team reached their breaking point. During prep for her testimony, she ignored their advice and posted a racially insensitive meme about the case, complete with jokes about prosthetic legs. "Miss Porter," Jonathan Pierce struggled to maintain his professional composure. "You have to understand how serious this is. Judge Cole has our back against the wall. Your social media activity is making it impossible to mount an effective defense." "Oh my God, you sound just like Daddy." Madison rolled her eyes, already composing. Another post. "Everyone needs to calm down. Nothing bad ever happens to me, remember? That's like my whole brand." The entire defense team quit the next morning, leaving Howard scrambling to find replacements. But top law firms, sensing the shifting winds, were suddenly too busy to take the case. Detective Morales seized the opportunity to serve search warrants on the offices of Howard's recently departed legal team. A junior lawyer, disgusted by what he'd witnessed, had been copying documents before leaving. The evidence of corruption and witness tampering was damning. Judge Cole received the latest anonymous tip about evidence tampering and began reviewing old cases involving Howard's business associates. A pattern emerged, a web of corruption stretching back decades, all protected by money and influence. "Your Honor," Margaret reported, "we've found similar patterns of evidence manipulation in at least 30 cases involving Porter Industries or its subsidiaries." The judge nodded grimly. "Document everything. This goes beyond one hit-and-run case now." Howard's desperation reached new heights. He attempted to have Judge Cole removed from the case, citing bias against his daughter. The hearing became a public embarrassment as his accusations fell apart under scrutiny. "Your Honor," Howard's new lawyer argued before the Judicial Review Board, "Judge Cole's handling of this case shows clear prejudice against Miss Porter's social media career and lifestyle." "Her lifestyle?" The head of the review board raised an eyebrow. "You mean her habit of mocking the victim while in court? Her documented attempts to intimidate witnesses? Please, counsel, do elaborate." The attempt to remove Judge Cole not only failed, but brought even more attention to Madison's inappropriate behavior. Video clips of her taking selfies during victim testimony went viral, drawing condemnation from social media influencers who had previously supported her. Madison's response was to double down, posting a video from the courthouse bathroom after Judge Cole confiscated her phone during another inappropriate filming incident. "This is literally discrimination against digital creators," she wailed, not realizing someone in another stall was recording her tantrum. "Don't they know who I am, who my father is?" The bathroom video leaked online, providing a perfect snapshot of the entitled attitude that had characterized Madison's entire life. But now, instead of finding it entertaining, the public was outraged. Howard's crisis management team worked overtime trying to contain the damage, but Madison's constant social media presence made it impossible. Every attempt to paint her as remorseful was undermined by her own posts, showing her partying, shopping, and making light of the proceedings. "Sir," Bradley Wells reported during a late-night strategy session, "we've lost control of the narrative. Judge Cole has managed to block our usual channels of influence and Miss Madison's social media activity. I don't want excuses." Howard shouted, his usual composed facade cracking. "I've spent her entire life making sure she never faces consequences. I'm not going to fail her now." But failure was becoming a real possibility. Detective Morales' investigation had uncovered a paper trail of bribes, threats, and corruption. The witnesses who had changed their stories were beginning to recant, feeling safer under Judge Cole's protective orders. Madison remained oblivious to the gathering storm. During another court session, while Terrence's physical therapist testified about his grueling recovery process, she was caught playing a mobile game under the defense table. "Miss Porter, Judge Cole's patience had clearly reached its limit. Since you seem unable to grasp the seriousness of these proceedings, perhaps a night in custody will adjust your perspective." "What? No." Madison's perfectly made-up face crumpled. In shock, "Daddy, do something!" For the first time in her life, Howard Porter could only watch helplessly as his daughter faced actual consequences. The sight of Madison being led away by court officers, still protesting that this isn't fair and "Don't you know who my father is?" became the day's top news story. She was released the next morning, but the brief taste of consequences had shaken her. For perhaps the first time, she began to realize that her father's money and influence might not be enough to protect her this time. Howard's response was to become even more aggressive in his attempts to control the situation. He doubled the bribes offered to witnesses, increased pressure on officials who might be sympathetic, and deployed his PR team to paint his daughter as the victim of a biased justice system. But Judge Cole had been preparing for exactly this kind of escalation. Each attempt at interference was documented, each threat recorded, each bribe attempt added to the growing file of evidence about the Porter family's corruption. Detective Morales found herself suddenly removed from the case, officially due to budget reassignment. But she'd anticipated this move and had already shared her evidence with trusted colleagues and journalism contacts. The walls were closing in, and even Howard Porter's money couldn't stop it. His usual tactics weren't just failing, they were actively making things worse. Each attempted manipulation only added to the evidence against them. Madison's social media empire began to crumble as followers turned against her. Her sponsored content deals were canceled one by one. The carefully curated image of the consequence-free princess was falling apart. "Daddy," she whined during a strategy meeting with their new legal team, "can't you just buy the judge like you usually do? This is so boring and I have a party tonight." Howard Porter, the man who had spent decades building a wall of money between his daughter and consequences, felt something he hadn't experienced since his own childhood. Helplessness. The machinery of justice, so long held at bay by wealth and influence, was finally beginning to move. And neither Howard's money nor Madison's social media influence could stop it. In his chambers, Judge Cole reviewed the latest evidence of the Porter family's attempts to obstruct justice. The pattern was clear: a lifetime of buying their way out of consequences, of treating the law as something that only applied to other people. "Your Honor," Margaret asked, "do you think they'll ever understand what they've done?" Judge Cole looked at the photo of Terrence Walker learning to walk with his prosthetic leg, then at Madison's social media post mocking his testimony. "Understanding isn't required for justice," he replied. "Only consequences are." The stage was set for a confrontation between wealth and justice, between privilege and accountability. And for the first time in his life, Howard Porter wasn't sure his money would be enough to buy his daughter's way out of trouble. Madison's carefully constructed world of consequence-free living was about to come crashing down. The only question was how much damage she would do to herself and others before she finally understood that some things can't be fixed with Daddy's money and a social media post. The reckoning was coming, and not even Howard Porter's billions could stop it. The Boston courthouse's largest courtroom was packed to capacity. Judge Desmond Cole had called a special hearing to address the mounting evidence of witness tampering and corruption. The evidence wall behind him told a damning story. Photographs, bank statements, and transcripts connected by red strings, all leading back to Howard Porter. "This court," Judge Cole's voice filled the silent room, "has uncovered a pattern of systematic interference with justice that spans decades. Today, we will address these attempts to obstruct justice in the case of the People versus Madison Porter." Madison sat at the defense table, for once not looking at her phone. The device had been confiscated at the door. Judge Cole's new zero-tolerance policy for her social media antics. Without her digital shield, she looked younger, almost vulnerable. Howard Porter watched from the gallery, his usual confident demeanor showing cracks. His newest legal team, the third since the trial began, shuffled papers nervously. They'd warned him this was coming, but he hadn't listened. "First exhibit." Judge Cole gestured to a screen where surveillance footage began to play. "This video shows Mr. Bradley Wells, an employee of Porter Industries, approaching witnesses with bribes. Mr. Wells, please stand." Bradley Wells, Howard's longtime fixer, rose slowly from his seat. 20 years of making problems disappear for the Porters had not prepared him for this moment. "This court is referring Mr. Wells for immediate prosecution on charges of witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to corrupt public officials. Bailiffs, please take him into custody." As Wells was led away in handcuffs, Madison finally seemed to grasp that something was seriously wrong. "Daddy?" she whispered, turning to look at her father. But Howard's attention was fixed on Judge Cole, watching his carefully constructed system of influence crumble. Outside the courthouse, justice for Terrence was trending nationwide. Madison's former friends, sensing the shift in public opinion, had begun mass deleting their photos with her. Her once mighty social media empire was imploding in real time. "Madison Porter canceled," read one viral tweet. "Time to face real consequences, not just Instagram filters." Yash privilege check. The online revolution against Madison gained momentum when her former prep school classmate, Emma Thompson, went public with a video detailing years of bullying and manipulation. "She made my life hell," Emma's tearful testimony spread across social media platforms. "And every time I tried to stand up to her, her father would threaten my family's business. We almost lost everything because Madison Porter decided she didn't like my shoes in 7th grade." More stories emerged, The teacher who lost his job after giving Madison a B+, the small business owner forced into bankruptcy after Madison damaged his store during a drunk driving incident, the scholarship student who attempted suicide after Madison's targeted harassment campaign. In the courtroom, Judge Cole was just getting started. The court has evidence of systematic attempts to manipulate this trial. Officers Sullivan and Peterson, please rise. The two police officers who had helped cover up evidence from the accident scene stood, their faces pale. Like everyone else in Howard's network, they'd believed his power would protect them. You are both suspended pending investigation. Please surrender your badges and weapons to the bailiff. Madison watched in growing horror as her father's protective network was dismantled piece by piece. Without her phone to hide behind, she couldn't avoid seeing the reality of what was happening. The day's most powerful moment came when 8-year-old Marcus Walker took the stand. Terrence and Sarah Walker's son sat straight in the too-big chair, his small face serious as he faced Madison. "I have a question," he said, his voice clear in the hushed courtroom. "Why didn't you stop to help my daddy?" Madison, for the first time in her life, had no response. No clever hashtag or filtered photo could deflect the simple honesty of a child's question. "He helps everybody," Marcus continued. "If you were hurt, he would have helped you. So why didn't you help him?" The video of Marcus's testimony went viral, instantly shared millions of times with captions like "Real courage versus privilege" and "The question Madison Porter can't answer." Outside the courthouse, Sarah Walker had organized a candlelight vigil for victims of privilege-based crimes. Hundreds gathered, holding signs and sharing stories of times when money and influence had denied them justice. "This isn't just about Terrence," Sarah told the crowd. "This is about a system that lets certain people believe they're above the law. Today, that system is finally being exposed." Detective Lisa Morales faced her own battle as Internal Affairs launched an investigation into her conduct. Howard's influence had triggered one last attempt to discredit her, but instead of backing down, she walked into Judge Cole's chambers and publicly submitted her entire evidence file. "I understand this may end my career," she stated for the record, "but the truth matters more than my job." The evidence she provided was damning. Recorded conversations, surveillance photos, bank records showing a complex web of payoffs and bribes. Howard Porter's influence machine had left a paper trail, and Detective Morales had found it. Madison, desperate to escape the mounting pressure, decided to go shopping at her favorite boutique. But the world had changed. Other customers began filming her, asking hostile questions about Terrence Walker. "How does it feel to be on our side of the camera?" one woman demanded, streaming live on social media. "Not so fun being the content instead of the creator, is it?" Store security had to escort Madison out through a back door as a crowd gathered, chanting, "Justice for Terrence," and "Privilege can't hide." The final blow to Howard's empire came when federal investigators froze his accounts as part of a broader corruption investigation. Suddenly, the man who had always solved problems with money found himself unable to access his wealth. "What do you mean declined?" Madison shrieked at a boutique clerk later that day, her credit card rejected for the first time in her life. "Don't you know who I am?" "Yes," the clerk replied calmly, clearly filming on her phone. "We all know exactly who you are now." The video of Madison's meltdown spread rapidly across social media, her infamous catchphrase, "Don't you know who I am?" becoming an instant meme symbolizing entitled privilege. During a lunch break in the proceedings, Elizabeth Porter, Madison's mother, finally reached her breaking point. Finding her daughter trying to set up a ring light for better selfie lighting in the courthouse bathroom, Elizabeth exploded. "Enough!" she shouted, knocking the ring light to the floor. "Look at what your father and I have created. We've raised a monster who cares more about her social media angles than the fact that she destroyed a man's life." Madison stared at her mother in shock. Elizabeth had always been a background figure, quietly enabling her husband's protection of their daughter. Her outburst represented another support beam crumbling in Madison's carefully constructed world. Back in court, the prosecution presented a devastating timeline of Madison's social media posts immediately after the accident. Photos of her partying, shopping, and mocking the proceedings played on the courtroom screens. "Note the timestamp on this post," the prosecutor highlighted. Less than 2 hours after leaving Mr. Walker bleeding in the street, the defendant posted this video of herself, dancing in a club, complaining about a scratch on her car's bumper. Madison squirmed in her seat as her own words condemned her. "OMG, you guys. Some total loser totally jumped in front of my car tonight. Now I have to get my bumper fixed. Rich girl problems. Daddy will fix it." The evidence mounted. Posts showing her complete lack of remorse, videos mocking Terrence's injury, selfies taken during emotional testimony. Each piece of content she'd created to maintain her image now served to destroy it. Howard Porter watched helplessly as his daughter's social media empire became evidence against her. Every attempt he'd made to protect her had only made things worse. His money couldn't buy influence anymore, not with his accounts frozen and his network of corruption exposed. Judge Cole's systematic dismantling of the Porter influence machine had broader implications. Other wealthy families who had operated with similar impunity began facing scrutiny. The phrase Porter privilege entered the cultural lexicon, describing the phenomenon of rich people buying their way out of consequences. Madison's former inner circle abandoned her completely. Her so-called friends deleted all traces of their association with her from their social media profiles. Brands that had once paid her thousands for endorsements now issued public statements denouncing her behavior. "I built this world for you," Howard told his daughter during a quiet moment in the courthouse corridor. "I thought I was protecting you. Instead, I turned you into this." For the first time, Madison saw real defeat in her father's eyes. The man who had always fixed everything, who had constructed an entire system to shield her from consequences, was powerless. The prosecution's final presentation focused on the human cost of Porter privilege. They showed testimony from dozens of people whose lives had been impacted by Madison's consequence-free existence. Former classmates, service workers, accident victims whose cases had been buried by Howard's money. "This case is about more than one hit and run," the prosecutor concluded. "It's about a systematic abuse of power that allowed Madison Porter to treat other people's lives as props in her social media performance. Today, that performance ends." Judge Cole adjourned court for the day, but the reckoning was far from over. Madison returned to her penthouse to find her influencer empire in ruins. Her follower count was plummeting, her sponsorship deals canceled, her carefully curated image shattered. Alone in her massive closet, surrounded by designer clothes and luxury items, Madison Porter faced something entirely new. Consequences that Daddy's money couldn't fix. The turning point had arrived, and there was no filter that could soften its impact. The morning sun cast long shadows through the courthouse windows as Howard Porter straightened his Italian silk tie one last time. The gesture, performed countless times over decades of wielding power in Boston's corridors of influence, felt different today. His hands, usually steady from years of signing checks to make problems disappear, trembled slightly. "Mr. Porter," his newest lawyer whispered urgently. "The FBI agents are—" The rest of the warning was cut off by the sudden appearance of federal agents entering the courtroom from multiple doors. Their movements were precise, practiced, inevitable. "Howard Porter," the lead agent's voice carried clearly through the suddenly silent courtroom, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and corruption of public officials." Madison, watching from the defense table, let out a sharp cry as handcuffs clicked around her father's wrists. "Daddy! No, you can't. Don't you know who he is?" The lead agent turned to her, his expression impassive. "Yes, Miss Porter. That's exactly why we're here." As Howard was led away, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Journalists rushed to file their stories. Photographers captured the moment the mighty Howard Porter was brought low, and Madison's world shattered completely. Judge Cole's voice cut through the chaos. "Order! This court is still in session, Miss Porter. Please return to your seat." But Madison remained standing, her designer outfit suddenly feeling like a costume as she watched her father disappear through the courtroom doors. For the first time in her life, Daddy couldn't fix things with a checkbook and a phone call. The scene triggered a cascade of memories, moments that had shaped Madison into who she was, now cast in a harsh new light. Age 7, breaking an expensive vase in a museum. Don't worry, princess, daddy will handle it. Age 12, bullying a classmate until she changed schools. It's not your fault, sweetheart. Some people just don't understand their place. Age 16, her first drunk driving incident. These things happen, dear. That's why we have lawyers. Each. Memory played out like evidence against not just Howard, but the system he'd created to protect his daughter from reality. Madison's new public defender, Janet Lewis, was a stark contrast to her previous legal team. No designer suit, no elegant briefcase, just a worn leather messenger bag and a determination to do her job. Miss Porter, Janet's voice was firm, but not unkind. You need to read these. She placed Terrence Walker's medical reports in front of Madison, not the sanitized versions her father's lawyers had shown her, but the real documents detailing every surgical procedure, every setback, every moment of pain. I don't... Madison pushed the papers away, but Janet pushed them right back. Yes, you do. For the first time in your life, you need to see the real consequences of your actions. As Madison began to read, her face slowly lost its practiced, social media-ready expression. The clinical descriptions of Terrence's injuries, the surgical complications, the psychological trauma, it was all there in black and white, impossible to filter or edit away. Meanwhile, federal agents were executing search warrants at Porter Industries offices across the city. What they found exceeded even their expectations. Spreadsheets tracking payoffs to officials, blackmail material on judges and prosecutors, detailed records of witnesses who had been silenced. He documented everything, one agent remarked to another as they boxed up evidence. Like he was proud of it. The evidence painted a picture of systematic corruption spanning decades. Howard Porter hadn't just broken the law. He'd created an entire parallel system where money could buy immunity from consequences. Back in the courtroom, Madison attempted to access her credit cards during a lunch break, only to find everything frozen as part of the federal investigation. What am I supposed to do? She demanded of her public defender. How am I supposed to live? Janet looked at her with a mixture of pity and frustration. Like everyone else, Miss Porter. Like everyone else. The afternoon brought another blow as recordings of Howard's conversations with his fixers were played in court. His casual dismissal of Terrence's injury was devastating. So he lost a leg, Howard's voice filled the courtroom. Offer him enough money and this goes away. Everyone has a price. Madison watched as Sarah Walker clutched her husband's hand, tears streaming down her face as she listened to Howard discuss her family's trauma as if it were a simple business transaction. The next morning, Madison visited her father in jail. The visiting room was nothing like the wood-paneled offices and exclusive clubs where they usually met. Howard Porter, stripped of his bespoke suits and power ties, looked almost small in his orange jumpsuit. Daddy, Madison's voice cracked. Fix this. Please fix this. Howard Porter, the man who had always had a solution, who had built an empire on making problems disappear, could only shake his head. I can't, princess. Not this time. The reality of those words hit Madison like a physical blow. For the first time in her 22 years, she faced a situation that couldn't be solved with her father's money or influence. Elizabeth Porter's testimony later that day drove the final nail into the coffin of Madison's privileged existence. Her mother, usually a silent partner in Howard's system of protection, broke down on the stand as she described years of enabling her daughter's worst impulses. We never said no, Elizabeth sobbed. When she hurt people, we paid them off. When she broke laws, we bought her way out. We didn't protect her. We turned her into someone who thinks other people's lives don't matter. Madison sat in stunned silence as her mother detailed incident after incident. The housekeeper Madison had gotten deported for daring to scold her. The small business owner who lost everything after Madison's false review went viral. The countless people whose lives had been damaged by her consequence-free existence. Howard's business partners, sensing the changing winds, began publicly distancing themselves. Companies cut ties with Porter Industries. Charitable organizations removed the Porter name from buildings, and the empire Howard had built began to crumble. The board has voted unanimously, the chairman of Porter Industries announced to the press. Howard Porter has been removed as CEO, effective immediately. Madison spent that night alone in her penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of privilege that had defined her existence. Her phone, once constantly buzzing with notifications, was silent. Her credit cards were useless. Her friends were gone. She wandered from room to room, really seeing her surroundings for the first time. The art pieces her father had bought to cover up walls she'd damaged in tantrums, the replaced windows from the time she'd thrown furniture during a live-streamed meltdown. Every luxury item represented a moment when consequences had been bought off. The prosecution's case grew stronger as Howard's former associates turned on him. Bradley Wells, facing his own charges, agreed to testify about decades of corruption. It wasn't just the hit and run, Wells testified. Every time Madison Porter broke a law or hurt someone, Howard had a system in place. Police were paid to lose evidence. Witnesses were bribed or threatened. Judges received generous donations to their favorite charities. The scope of Howard's corruption stunned even veteran investigators. He hadn't just occasionally bent rules. He'd created an entire shadow system of justice where money could buy immunity from consequences. Look at these numbers, Detective Morales showed Judge Cole. Over the past decade alone, Porter Industries spent more on bribes and cover-ups than most companies spend on research and development. Madison's public defender forced her to confront this reality during their preparation sessions. Your father didn't protect you, Janet explained bluntly. He prevented you from developing any understanding of consequences. Now you're facing them all at once. The truth of those words became clearer each day. Madison watched as her father's carefully constructed protection system was dismantled piece by piece. Each revelation brought new understanding of just how artificial her world had been. Howard's recorded conversations with fixers revealed the calculated nature of his system. Everything had a price. Police officers' loyalty, witnesses' silence, victims' pain. He'd treated justice like a commodity to be bought and sold. The girl needs to learn. One recording captured a rare moment of doubt from Howard. But not like this. Never like this. Keep her safe, no matter the cost. That cost was now being tallied in human terms. As Howard's corruption was exposed, more victims came forward. People whose lives had been derailed by Madison's actions, only to be silenced by Howard's money. Madison's mother took the stand again, this time to describe how the family's wealth had corrupted their relationships. We never taught her empathy, Elizabeth testified, her voice heavy with regret. How could we? Every time she hurt someone, Howard made it disappear. She never had to face the people she harmed or understand their pain. The testimony hit Madison hard. She'd always seen her father's interventions as love, his protection as natural. Now she began to understand how his money had built walls between her and reality. Late that night, alone in her penthouse, Madison tried to order dinner only to have her credit card declined again. The simple act of not being able to buy what she wanted represented a fundamental shift in her world. She wandered through her massive closet, running her hands over designer clothes that represented thousands of dollars spent to maintain her image. Each item now felt like evidence of how artificial her life had been. Howard's empire continued to crumble as more evidence emerged. His business partners fled, his political connections denied knowing him, and his influence evaporated. It's not just about the money, one federal prosecutor explained to the press. Howard Porter created a system that corrupted our entire justice system. He made his daughter believe she was above the law, and he bribed or threatened anyone who tried to tell her differently. Madison's public defender worked to help her understand the gravity of her situation. Your father's money can't help you anymore, Janet explained. For the first time in your life, you'll have to face the consequences of your actions. The reality of those consequences became clearer each day. Madison watched as her father's protection system was dismantled, leaving her exposed to the real world for the first time. As the sun set on another day of revelations, Madison stood at her penthouse window, looking out at a city that no longer bent to her will. In her reflection, she saw something new. Not a princess in her tower, but a young woman facing reality for the first time. The father had fallen. and with him fell the walls that had protected his daughter from consequences for so long. The question now was whether Madison Porter could learn to live in a world where actions had real consequences, where Daddy's money couldn't make problems disappear. The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, and it would change her forever. The jury had been deliberating for 3 days. Each hour felt like an eternity as Madison Porter sat in her now empty penthouse, surrounded by designer clothes she could no longer wear and luxury items she could no longer enjoy. Her phone, once her constant companion, lay silent. Her social media account suspended, her followers vanished, her digital empire in ruins. A call from her public defender, Janet Lewis, broke the silence. They've reached a verdict. Be at the courthouse in an hour. And Madison, dress appropriately. For the first time in her life, Madison had to prepare for court without her glam team. No professional makeup artist, no hairstylist, no fashion consultant. She stood before her massive closet, suddenly uncertain about every choice. After several failed attempts at her usual courtroom fashion statements, she finally selected a simple black suit, probably the most understated thing she'd ever worn. Her hands trembled as she tried to apply her own makeup. The results, far from her usual perfection. The courthouse steps, once her favorite backdrop for selfies, now felt like a gauntlet. Reporters and photographers crowded the entrance, but they weren't there to admire her outfit this time. Miss Porter, how does it feel to face real consequences? Madison, any comments about your father's corruption? Are you ready for prison? Inside, the courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled, with overflow crowds watching on monitors in adjacent rooms. The case had captured national attention, becoming a symbol of privilege and accountability. Terrence Walker sat with his family in the front row. His prosthetic leg was visible beneath his pants, a stark reminder of the real human cost of Madison's actions. Behind him, dozens of other victims of the Porter family's corruption waited to see justice served. Judge Cole entered, his presence commanding immediate silence. Madison noticed details she'd been too self-absorbed to see before: the dignity in his bearing, the wisdom in his eyes, the weight of responsibility he carried. Before the jury returns, Judge Cole addressed the court. I want to review some key evidence that led us here. On the courtroom screens, Madison's own social media posts appeared. The morning after the accident, her complaining about a scratch on her car. During Terrence's testimony, taking selfies and making jokes about prosthetics throughout the trial, showing complete disregard for the pain she'd caused. Each post felt like a nail in her coffin, but for the first time, Madison truly saw them through others' eyes. She watched her digital self mock a man's tragedy, dismiss his pain, treat his life-altering injury as content for her followers. Bring in the jury, Judge Cole ordered. The jury filed in, none meeting Madison's eyes. The foreman handed the verdict to the clerk, who passed it to Judge Cole. The rustle of paper seemed deafening in the silent courtroom. In the case of the People versus Madison Porter, on the charge of leaving the scene of an accident resulting in serious bodily injury, how do you find? The foreman stood. Guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment? Guilty. On the charge of driving under the influence? Guilty. Each guilty landed like a physical blow. Madison gripped the defense table, her carefully manicured nails leaving marks in the wood. Judge Cole set aside the verdict forms and looked directly at Madison. Before I pronounce sentence, I will review the pattern of behavior that brought us here. He began listing incidents, each one stripped of the protection money and privilege had once provided. The teacher whose career she'd destroyed for giving her a B+, the housekeepers she'd had deported for minor offenses, the small businesses, ruined by her vindictive reviews, the students driven from school by her bullying, the countless service workers humiliated for her entertainment. Each of these incidents, Judge Cole continued, was buried by your father's money and influence. Each time you hurt someone, the consequences were bought off. This created in you a deadly belief in your own immunity from responsibility. Madison felt tears running down her face, ruining her amateur makeup attempt. But for once she wasn't crying for herself. She was crying for all the people she'd hurt, all the lives she'd damaged without a second thought. The night you hit Terrence Walker, Judge Cole's voice grew stern. You were live streaming while driving drunk. You were showing off for your followers, treating public roads like your private playground. When you struck Mr. Walker, you didn't stop. You didn't call for help. You posted about the scratch on your car. The courtroom screen showed Madison's post from that night, the words damning her more thoroughly than any testimony. OMG, some people should watch where they're walking. Now my baby needs a new bumper. Rich girl problems. Your subsequent behavior during this trial has demonstrated a continued lack of remorse or understanding. You treated these proceedings like content for your social media following. You mocked Mr. Walker's injury. You showed contempt for this court and the very concept of justice. Each word struck home. Madison saw her father in his prison jumpsuit, her mother's tear-stained face, the Walker family's dignity in the face of her cruelty. She saw the true cost of her consequence-free existence. However, Judge Cole continued, recent events have stripped away the protection that enabled your behavior. Your father's arrest and the exposure of his corruption have removed the system that shielded you from responsibility. For the first time in your life, Madison Porter, you will face real consequences. The sentence, when it came, was comprehensive. 5 years in state prison, mandatory counseling, significant financial restitution to the Walker family, community service working with amputees after release. Furthermore, Judge Cole added, this court orders the immediate suspension of all your social media accounts. Your platform was a weapon you used to mock and humiliate others. That ends today. As if on cue, Madison's remaining social media accounts went dark. Her millions of followers, her verified status, her influence, all gone in an instant. The reality of prison hit hard as she was led away in handcuffs. No designer clothes, no luxury amenities, no daddy to fix things, just concrete walls and iron bars. Her final walk through the courtroom was a stark contrast to her first appearance. Gone was the smirking selfie taker in couture. In her place was a young woman finally facing the consequences of her actions. Terrence Walker and his family watched silently as she passed. Marcus, their young son, asked quietly, "Mom, is she sorry now?" Sarah Walker held her son close. "I think, for the first time in her life, she might be." Outside the courthouse, Howard Porter's corruption continued to have ripple effects. Police officers were being investigated. Judges were being reviewed. The entire system that had protected privilege at the expense of justice was being dismantled. Detective Morales, vindicated by the verdict, began working with a task force investigating similar cases of privilege and corruption. The Porter case had exposed a pattern that went beyond one family. Madison's mother, Elizabeth, left the courtroom alone. Her designer handbag contained divorce papers, her final break from the corrupt world Howard had built. The media coverage was immediate and overwhelming. Porter Princess Falls read one headline. Privilege meets justice, declared another. Madison's story became a cautionary tale about wealth, power, and accountability. In the holding cell, waiting to be transported to prison, Madison found herself without her phone for the first time in years. No filters, no followers, no way to hide from reality behind a screen. She thought about Terrence Walker, about all the people she'd hurt, about the life she'd lived without ever considering the consequences of her actions. Real tears, not the camera-ready kind she'd perfected, for social media, fell freely. The guard who came to transport her wasn't impressed by her tears or her family name. Madison Porter was just another prisoner now, headed for a very different kind of gated community than the one she'd grown up in. Her designer clothes were exchanged for a prison uniform. Her luxury makeup was removed. Her carefully maintained image was stripped away, leaving only the reality of who she'd been and what she'd done. The prison transport van had no windows for her to check her reflection in. For the first time, Madison Porter couldn't curate her image or control her narrative. She could only sit with the truth of her actions and their consequences. Back in the courtroom, Judge Cole was writing his final notes on the case. The Porter verdict would set precedents for future cases involving privilege and accountability. Justice isn't a commodity, he wrote. It cannot be bought, sold, or bartered. Today, that principle was upheld. The Walker family left the courthouse, surrounded by supporters. Terrence's story had become a rallying point for those fighting against systemic privilege and corruption. Madison's last glimpse of freedom was through the prison transport van's windshield. The city she'd once treated as her personal playground now seemed like a different world entirely. The heavy gates of the state prison closed behind her with a final-sounding clang. Madison Porter, who had spent her entire life avoiding consequences, was finally facing them head-on. Her journey from privileged princess to prisoner was complete. The question now was whether she could learn from it, whether she could become something more than the selfish, entitled person she'd been. The answer would take time, but for the first time in her life, Madison Porter had nothing but time to think about her actions and their consequences. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Madison Porter faced her first morning in state prison. Gone were her silk sheets and blackout curtains, replaced by a thin mattress and the unforgiving glare of institutional lighting. Her designer wardrobe had been exchanged for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that she couldn't accessorize or alter. "Porter," a guard's voice echoed through the cell block. "Time for processing." The intake process stripped away the last vestiges of her privileged existence. Her perfectly maintained hair was examined for contraband. Her manicured nails were checked and clipped to regulation length. Every aspect of her appearance that she'd once controlled so carefully was now subject to prison rules. "Name tag goes on the left," the processing officer instructed, treating her exactly like any other inmate. "You'll be assigned to General. Population Block C." Madison's first attempt to pull rank fell flat. "Don't you know who she began, but the officer cut her off. "Yeah, we all know who you were. In here, you're just inmate 247891. The reality of prison life hit hard. No special treatment, no shortcuts, no daddy's money to smooth things over. Every basic task that servants had once handled for her now fell to her unpracticed hands. Meanwhile, across town, Terrence Walker was attending his physical therapy session. The difference was striking. Instead of the overcrowded public facility he'd initially been assigned to, he now worked with top specialists in a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center, all funded by seized assets from Porter Industries. "The prosthetic is responding well," his therapist noted as Terrence practiced navigating stairs. "You're making remarkable progress." Sarah Walker watched from the sidelines, holding a check that represented the first installment of Madison's court-ordered restitution. The money couldn't replace her husband's leg, but it would ensure their son Marcus's education and the family's financial security. Judge Desmond Cole hadn't been idle since the verdict. Using the Porter case as a catalyst, he established a foundation dedicated to helping victims of privilege-based crimes. The organization worked to identify cases where wealth and influence had obstructed justice, providing legal support and resources to those who had been silenced by money and power. "The Porter case opened our eyes," he explained to a gathering of legal professionals. "How many other victims are out there, silenced by wealth and influence? How many other Howard Porters are buying their children's way out of consequences?" Detective Lisa Morales, vindicated by the investigation's outcome, received a promotion. She now headed a new task force specifically focused on investigating corruption and privilege-related crimes. The evidence she'd gathered against the Porters had exposed a network of corruption that reached far beyond one family. "The Porter case was just the beginning," she told her team during their first briefing. "We're looking at similar patterns across multiple wealthy families. The days of buying immunity from justice are over." Howard Porter faced his own trial, the evidence of decades of corruption proving overwhelming. His fellow inmates at the federal prison weren't impressed by his once mighty name or his stories of wealth and influence. He was just another white-collar criminal, his empire of corruption reduced to commissary privileges and visiting hours. Elizabeth Porter, freed from her husband's influence, filed for divorce and began working with domestic violence organizations, sharing her perspective on how wealth and power could create toxic family dynamics. "I thought we were protecting Madison," she admitted during a support group session. "Instead, we were crippling her ability to function as a human being. Money doesn't just corrupt the people who have it, it corrupts their children, teaching them they're above consequences. In prison, Madison struggled to adapt to a world where her name meant nothing and money couldn't solve problems. Simple tasks that servants had always handled for her became daily challenges. She had to learn to make her own bed, clean her own space, manage her own schedule. Her first weeks were particularly difficult. Used to commanding attention on social media, she now found herself ignored or actively avoided by other inmates. Her attempts at superiority were met with cold indifference or open hostility. The turning point came during a mandatory counseling session. The prison therapist, Dr. Rachel Bennett, had heard all of Madison's excuses and deflections before. "Let's talk about Terrence Walker," Dr. Bennett suggested during their third session. "Not about the accident, about him as a person. What do you know about him?" Madison opened her mouth to deliver her usual practiced response about unfortunate accidents and unclear road conditions, but Dr. Bennett stopped her. "No, Madison. What do you know about him as a human being? About his work with troubled youth? About his family? About the lives he's changed?" For the first time, Madison had to confront Terrence Walker as a person rather than an inconvenience to be handled with Daddy's money. Dr. Bennett showed her news coverage of the community center, testimonials from teens whose lives Terrence had turned around, pictures of programs he'd developed despite working with minimal funding. "While you were spending millions on clothes and parties," Dr. Bennett pointed out, "he was changing lives with whatever resources he could scrape together." Think about that contrast. The realization hit Madison hard. She'd spent her life treating people as props in her social media performance, never considering their humanity or the impact of her actions on their lives. 6 months into her sentence, Madison joined a prison support group for inmates working on taking responsibility for their actions. The other prisoners were initially skeptical of the former social media princess, but her growing genuine remorse gradually earned their respect. "I never had to think about consequences," she admitted during one session. "Daddy's money made everything go away. I never had to face the people I hurt or understand their pain. I lived in this bubble where nothing I did had real impact because money could fix everything." As part of her rehabilitation, Madison began working in the prison's occupational therapy program, helping inmates with physical disabilities adapt to their limitations. The irony of her situation, helping people with challenges similar to what she'd caused Terrence Walker, wasn't lost on her. A year into her sentence, Madison wrote a letter to the Walker family. Unlike her previous public statements crafted by lawyers and PR teams, this was raw and genuine. "Dear Mr. Walker and family, I know no words can undo what I did to you. For the first time in my life, I understand that some things can't be fixed with money or influence. I've spent my entire life hurting people and letting my father make the consequences disappear. That night, I didn't just take your leg. I showed the worst of what privilege and entitlement can do to a person's humanity. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm writing because I want you to know that I finally understand the cost of my actions, not just the physical cost to you, but the human cost to your family, your work, and all the young people you help. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become someone who adds value to the world instead of taking it away." The letter wasn't a magic solution. The Walkers' pain and challenges remained. But it represented something significant. The first time Madison Porter had taken genuine responsibility for her actions without trying to buy her way out of consequences. Meanwhile, Terrence's story had inspired change beyond Boston. His community center, now properly funded through seized Porter assets and public support, became a model for similar programs nationwide. He turned his tragedy into an opportunity to help others, advocating for both justice reform and accessibility rights. "What happened to me exposed a broken system," he told a gathering of community activists. "But it also showed that justice is possible, even against wealth and privilege. We just have to be willing to fight for it." Judge Cole's foundation began seeing results, helping other victims of privilege-based crimes find their voices and seek justice. The Porter case had created a template for holding wealthy offenders accountable, breaking down the wall of money and influence that had protected them. Detective Morales' task force uncovered similar patterns of corruption in other wealthy families, leading to more investigations and arrests. The Porter case had opened a door that couldn't be closed, exposing how money had corrupted the justice system. Howard Porter, watching his empire crumble from federal prison, finally began to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. Not just the corruption and bribery, but the damage he'd done to his own daughter by teaching her that money could erase consequences. "I thought I was protecting her," he told his therapist during a mandatory session. "Instead, I turned her into someone who couldn't function in the real world. Every time I solved her problems with money, I prevented her from growing as a person." Elizabeth Porter channeled her experience into advocacy work, speaking about the hidden costs of privilege and the importance of teaching children accountability, regardless of their social status. As Madison's first year in prison drew to a close, she looked at her reflection in the metal mirror of her cell. Gone was the perfectly curated social media princess. In her place was someone learning, painfully and gradually, how to be a real person. The final month of that year brought an unexpected development. The prison's occupational therapy program received a new client, an inmate who had lost his leg in an accident. Madison was assigned to help him adapt to his prosthetic. Working with him, she gained an even deeper understanding of what she'd done to Terrence Walker. Every struggle, every moment of frustration, every small victory in adapting to life with a prosthetic became a lesson in the real human cost of her actions. 2 years into her sentence, Madison was allowed to watch a documentary about Terrence's community center on the prison's limited TV privileges. She saw him working with teenagers, teaching them about resilience and responsibility despite his disability. "Sometimes bad things happen to us," Terrence told his students in the documentary. "But what matters is how we respond. Do we let it break us, or do we use it to become stronger and help others?" Madison Porter, former social media princess and embodiment of consequence-free privilege, wrote those words in her journal. For the first time in her life, she was learning the lesson her father's money had prevented her from understanding. Every action has consequences, and real strength comes from facing them rather than buying your way out. The story of Madison Porter became more than just another rich girl facing justice. It became a catalyst for change, a wake-up call about the corrupting influence of wealth and privilege, and a reminder that true growth often comes through facing consequences rather than avoiding them. As she continued serving her sentence, Madison Porter was becoming something she'd never been before, a human being who understood the impact of her actions on others. It wasn't a happy ending. Those only existed in her old social media posts. But it was something more valuable. A real one. What would you do if you witnessed privilege destroying lives in your community? Have you seen wealth buy its way out of justice? If this story of accountability spoke to you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of justice served. Share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes. Even the most privileged princess can't escape the consequences of her actions. And remember, in the end, not everything has a price tag.